Hello, my name is Leah Peterson, and today I hope to not only educate my audience on the structural racism in education present in my hometown of Burlington, Wisconsin, but also provide suggestions to improve the quality of education in Burlington schools by eliminating this institutional racism. In Matthew Desmond and Mustafa Emerberry's book Racial Domination, Racial Progress, they delve into the topic of whiteness in education. They begin this section of their book with some important questions, such as, how is racial domination normalized in the educational field, and where does whiteness lurk in our curriculum, classrooms, and campuses? These questions then begin to be answered when W.E.B. Du Bois, a critic of whiteness in education, concluded that the literature on slavery and its fall, books and articles penned by white male authors, functioned for our pleasure and amusement, for inflating our national ego and giving us a false but pleasurable sense of accomplishment. With a determination unparalleled in science, the mass of American writers have started out so to distort the facts of the greatest critical period of American history as to prove right wrong and wrong right. These falsifications of historical facts did end up appearing in schools' textbooks until even the 1950s, demonstrating the role of racial domination within the creation of our history, and eventually the school curriculums that, probably unintentionally and unknowingly, promote and glorify white supremacy. While justification for slavery and other racially oppressive actions are more or less dismissed and thought with less distortion, whiteness in schools' curriculums are still evident in their use of Eurocentric historical accounts. These accounts consider the stories and experiences of Americans of European descent central to our knowledge of American history, while marginalizing the stories and experiences of non-European Americans. This whiteness then casts America as a white nation with a white history and blinds us to the ways in which non-white groups contributed to the development of the United States. An accurate and comprehensive American history is thoroughly multiracial, and casts a backward glance at American history and sees the nation in all its complex diversity, a panoply of people from all points of the globe, toiling and suffering and persevering, each fully belonging to our past and present, thus reducing the pain of the oppression of non-white history. Literature, anthropology, and feminism are even affected by whiteness. In anthropology, white communities are perceived as uninteresting, as they are considered normal, while the communities of non-white groups are seen as exotic, and worth the time of predominantly white anthropologists to study, making their ethnography efforts help to normalize whiteness. Meanwhile, some feminist movements completely rule out the particular struggles of being a woman connected to a specific race, which then only hinders these other women that are not classified in the mainstream women's movement. Literature as well is misleading because most works that have been considered important have been by white authors, leaving any works by non-whites unappreciated and unrecognized. The whiteness in schools is then just one example of institutional or structural racism, which is systemic white domination of people of color, embedded and operating in corporations, universities, legal systems, political bodies, cultural life, and other social collectives. Seeing how curriculums in schools are carried out with a centrality to teaching white dominance then brings us to my hometown. 10,000 people, the city of Burlington, Wisconsin, famous mostly for its acknowledgement as the hometown of the Dallas Cowboys quarterback Tony Romo, being dubbed as Chocolate City USA, and questions like, Burlington, as in Burlington Coat Factory? Which is a no. With an innocent-sounding background like that, it is hard to imagine it as a place of hindrance to children's education, but yet it is due to the presence of structural racism within its systems. In looking for race within these curriculums, I searched the sources each school in Burlington provided online, looking for the topic of race to be mentioned within their classes, especially social studies and literary classes, where the topic of racial inequality is often overlooked. Burlington School District is split into 11 schools, varying in levels of education and by whether they are private or public. Of these 11, only in the websites of 4 of the schools could I actually find a reference to race being taught, meaning that up to 7 schools just might not be publicizing it, or unfortunately, might not even be addressing the topic of race and inequality to their students at all. Both the two high schools in Burlington had the most impressive results as they each offered classes outside of American history that had racial emphasis. At the public high school, they offered a course called African American Literature, the description of focusing on the significant writings and authors in the development of African American literature, and the cultural phenomena that contributed to the development of this literature. The private high school as well offers a course called African American History, in which includes the history of Africans in the British and eventually American society up to modern times, examining the sociological impact of racism in a modern world, and trying to answer the potentially unanswerable questions of how racism continues to exist in an enlightened society. While both admirable for providing these classes to make their students more aware of race in America, they still have some downsides. Unfortunately, both of these classes are electives, so those that choose not to take these classes are cheating themselves of important features of American history and culture. Also, why wouldn't these classes be incorporated into the mandatory literature and history classes? African American culture is and was a huge denominating factor in the creation of the United States identity, so having it being a completely different class outside of American history further makes whiteness in education evident. Another thing this class then leads to think is, why aren't there any other classes on different races or ethnicities? Are these other races being included in American history courses, or are they being even more oppressed by structural racism that they are not even featured in any offered courses? The two other schools that address the topic of race are a 7th and an 8th grade class. The public school lists within their description of social studies that students will explain the influence of status, ethnic origin, race, gender, age, prejudice, and stereotyping, and how they contribute to conflict and interactions of individuals in a society, admirably taking a seemingly direct approach to learning about race and other facets that form an identity and culture. The private school, though, only had one lesson plan on Jim Crow segregation, but had no other signs of lessons on other racial issues. The private school's use of race in class is a great example of whiteness in the curriculum, because even though race was mentioned once, doesn't mean that it is explored deeply enough, as it is a multidimensional topic that has more to it than just Jim Crow segregation and the civil rights movement. Altogether, the schools that mention race are limited to junior high or higher, limiting the topic of race to 7th grade to seniors in high school, while keeping those in preschool to 6th grade in the dark about the importance of race, as well as the other classes within the schools that offer courses on race to only certain grades. However, it must be noted that because it's not on their course website does not mean that race is not being acknowledged in those schools. Racial Domination, Racial Progress does point out, though, that the noticeable lack of critical engagement with racial domination in elementary and high school classrooms itself is evidence that whiteness thrives in these arenas, making it highly likely that these schools are getting the watered-down version of American history, literature, and other educational topics, as they lack the multiracial dimension to them. In a city that's about 88% white, the structural racism in a children's education may be able to slip by unnoticed in Burlington. Hammerbear and Desmond mention that while many non-white students grow up talking about race, many white students did not, making it more possible for the lack of learning about race continue without a protest or even the realization of the consequences. The normalized white view of the U.S. is a problem for the multiple reasons I mentioned from Desmond and Emmerbear, but also because the censorship means we are taking away opportunities for children to be more educated on the topic of race and make them more aware of race's very dominant presence in society. We are doing a huge disservice to all these kids, because these are the young, impressionable minds that may someday be inspired to help change the inequality of race within our nation. The only way to address and fix the problem of whiteness in education is a direct approach. We must go straight to the source to broaden what children are learning today, by consulting those that determine what goes into a textbook and whoever decides the school's curriculum. They need to be addressed specifically to be shown how unfair the current standard of education is and how detrimental it is to a children's learning experience to withhold such information. They can only be convinced by showing firsthand how there is a whiteness in schools' teaching, and have their eyes open to the Eurocentric historical accounts that are in place, as well as the multiple dimensions to race and ethnicity, and what else is related to it, such as crime and the justice system, income and wealth, the media, sports, pop culture, familial relationships, and so much more. Having these people that are in a place of power acknowledge these facts can then allow them to present the same findings and reasoning to justify changing the usual white-dominated books and teachings. The same arguments that would be told to those in power can also be addressed to other people in lesser positions of power, such as teachers and parents. Teachers can implement race and ethnicity into lessons in minor ways that still may have major impacts, no matter what the children's age is, bringing their students' attention towards the presence of race in society. Parents as well can have the opportunity to discuss race with their kids if they are taught about the importance of race, which can instruct the importance to the parents themselves, first through meetings or newsletters or the like, and can even offer advice on how to mention it to their children. The opportunities are endless when children become instructed in the many aspects of our society, and with that in mind, anything that can be done to help them achieve such a chance should be acted upon for the bettering of that child, the society, and our nation.